Good evening, everyone. We are now in Joshua chapter 9, right after the defeat of Ai. And it came to pass when all the kings who were on this side of the Jordan, in the hills, in the lowland, and in all the coasts of the great sea toward Lebanon, Hittite, Amorite, Canaanite, Perizzite, Hivite, Jebusite, they heard about it. And so this is important. The idea here is the news traveled very quickly, and they heard about what the children of Israel did to the people of Ai. And so that became an important point, that they gathered together to fight with Joshua and Israel with one accord. Now, let me just break this down, and then we will take a look at the geography. Now, in this case, you find that in verse 2, they gathered together. The word gathered together is to assemble, which means that they were not always together, and they were all independent parties, but at this point in time, they felt that they need to be assembled together in this way. And the idea here of fight is to make war, because the children of Israel is coming in to actually wage a battle with them. And so they thought that they would come together as a stronger party together. Now, this word one accord in the Hebrew is actually pe echad. Let me just write this down. Pe echad. Now, that would be equivalent to one mouth. And so this is actually an expression. One mouth means they will come together and they will do with one singular intent, and that is to wage war with Joshua and Israel. And so these were the people, and they were on this side of the Jordan. Which side of the Jordan? The west side of the Jordan. And then they were in the hills, in the lowland, and in the coastal region of the Great Sea. The Great Sea would be the Mediterranean, toward Lebanon. Lebanon would be toward the north. And so with this, I think it would be useful for us to take a look at the what we call it, the geography of this area. And so if you remember all these things, the west side, right, the west side of Jordan, the hills, the lowland, the coast of the Great Sea towards Lebanon. Let me just share this with you. Let's look at this again. So they started from Shittim, they crossed over to Gilgal, they attacked Jericho, and then they went after Ai. Now, all of these are important areas. Now, for our purposes for this evening, I think it's important for us to realize that this is the Great Sea. The Mediterranean Sea is the Great Sea. And we're talking about the people who are living along the coast and also in the north and in the inland. Now, what basically you find is that these are all the kings, apart from the Philistines. They are all the people of the land. And without going all the way north to the Galilee area, they thought that since Joshua and the children of Israel are already in Ai and in Jericho, perhaps they would do this and get together and kill off the threat. That's basically the thinking in chapter 9. Now, as they are assembling together, I want us to pay attention to the Hivite. The Hivite are part of this group that is getting together: the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. And understand, the Jebusite stronghold is actually in Salem, right? In Jerusalem. And they heard about what they have done, and they want to come and wage war with Joshua and Israel. Now, when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, these would be the neighboring cities, and Gibeon are the Hivites. All right, I just want you to understand that they are the Hivites. They were also in, I guess, in Genesis chapter 34. You should also read Genesis chapter 34, the story of Hamor and Shechem. And Shechem raped the daughter of Jacob by the name of Dinah, and the brothers decided to go and seek revenge on this family of the Hivite by tricking them. And if you go back and read Genesis 34, they said that, yes, we would allow Shechem to marry Dinah if every one of them were circumcised. And so they decided to circumcise all the Hivites there. And when they were in pain, they came and killed them all. And so there was a precedent in Genesis 34 when there was a deception that was put in place for a revenge. And so now let's look at verse 3 and now verse 4. The inhabitants of Gibeon worked craftily. What do you mean by work craftily? The meaning of crafty here is, I guess, shrewdness, with shrewdness, crafty. I think you could use crafty, shrewdness. What else could we use? Trickery. And it's important for us to realize that this word crafty comes from the root word of trickery, or of how the serpent in the Garden of Eden behaved. All right? And so this should give you a feel of what they are planning. It is to trick Joshua and the children of Israel. And they went and then they pretended to be ambassadors. What does this mean is that they actually went and I guess the word here is to pretend to be a representative, right? An envoy, a representative of the people of Gibeon. Now, they never said anything about Gibeon. And all they said eventually was somewhere far away. The whole idea there of the trickery or the craftiness, like the serpent in the Garden of Eden, was to engage with them to get an end objective done. And so if you read on, they took old sacks on their donkeys, old wineskins torn and mended, old and parched sandals on their feet, old garments on themselves. All the bread was dry and moldy. And this whole this whole thing here is about a pretense, right? It is a pretense. And I guess you would find that the word pretended to be ambassadors is really not well, I guess it's not in the in the in the Hebrew itself, but you can actually read it as though they acted, right, as ambassadors. And this entire phrase, the sentence here in verse 4 to verse 5 is the act. And they made themselves look the part. And that is the interesting part of this. And so they went to Joshua at Gilgal, which means that after they all went back to Gilgal, which would be their home base, right? Gilgal is the home base. They went to attack Jericho, they went back to Gilgal. They attacked they went back to Gilgal. So Gilgal became the base. And then they said to him, men of Israel, look at their statements. We have come from a far country. Now, they are already playing the role to pretend who they are not. So in verse 6, they said they come from a remote land, a distant land. The word country is land, right? So let's not read this in modern terms, right? A distant land. And they said, well, why don't you make a covenant with us? In verse 6, to, well, understand this, in the old days, to make a covenant means to cut a berit with us. Now, let me just pause here, and I need to make a statement and a reminder. In Exodus chapter 34, which we completed on Sunday, Moses pleaded with God to be with them as they journey to the promised land. Because in chapter 33, God said, I don't want to go with you. I want to send an angel. But they confess their sins, and God says, okay, if that's the case, I will make or cut a covenant with you. And in that covenant that God says he will do all these things, he made it a condition that the children of Israel will never cut a covenant with the people of this land, this promised land. Now, the reason why God didn't want them to cut a covenant with the people of the land is that in the event they do, they stand to take a risk that the daughters of the land will lead the sons of Israel to serve other gods. And that was the precondition of the covenant, that idolatry will not be tolerated. And so one of the things was not to cut a covenant. Don't be friends with them, that you will become one of them. Now, that needs to be borne in mind. And now in chapter 9 in Joshua, we read that they are looking, the people of Gibeon is looking to make a covenant with the children of Israel. And then the men of Israel said to the Hivites, look, they are Hivites, and they don't live far away. They are probably the next city that they would probably attack, because they are a little bit south of Ai, and they are bigger and better than Ai. And yet they had decided not to join with the brothers in arms to wage war. For whatever the reason, I'm not going to speculate. They have decided that the people of Gibeon had decided, although they are bigger and better than Ai, and they can withstand the onslaught, they have decided not to fight the children of Israel. And you need to look at what they say. Perhaps you can dwell among us so that we can make a covenant or cut a covenant with you. And that's the desire of the men of these ambassadors who pretend to be from a faraway land. And in this covenant, they said to Joshua, in the covenant, we are your servants. We are your servants. Now understand this in the Hebrew term. This means that they will be under instruction of Israel. Right? I don't like to use the word slave in this instance. Basically, what the Gibeonites or this group who pretend to be ambassadors from a faraway land is saying that we will want to then serve you. So we are your servants means we will be under the instruction of Israel. And Joshua asked them, who are you? Where do you come from? And these are important questions. And they said to him, we are from a very far country. Verse 9 says, a very far, a very distant land. So ignore the word country, and this is a faraway land, which means that, well, you would not engage us right now, but we are here to make peace with you. And so your servants have come because of the name of Jehovah your God. We have heard of his fame and all he did in Egypt. Now understand this, the word fame. I think this is important for us to break down. The idea here of fame is shomar. And the name is Shem. And these are all playing the same word, right? And we have heard, meaning they have received reports. And the word fame means a report. They heard of what God has done. You see, when God did something, the children of Israel didn't go around telling the people all over what God has done. The interesting observation that we can see here is when God did something, right? When God did something, the Shem, the name of Jehovah, your Elohim, we have heard, and all from Egypt, right? What he did in Egypt, the 10 plagues, the crossing of the Red Sea, all he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, and this would be the east of the Jordan, to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, to Og, the king of Bashan, who was at Ashtaroth. And you would have read these in the book of Numbers. If you have studied that, we did that in the book of Deuteronomy in a review of these events where God says, don't touch Edom, don't touch Moab, don't touch Ammon, but I am going to give you Sihon and Og. And they were bigger, taller, stronger, fortified cities. And Moses led the children of Israel take over that place, and 3 parcels of land were distributed out. And see, everything that God did, they heard. Not because of what the Israelites told the people, but when God did something, it showed the people keeping tabs on what is happening all over the place. And this would indeed put a note in our mind that God is such a great God that whatever he did in Egypt, we can't actually fathom the reverberations or the way that the news had traveled so far and broad and wide that the children of Israel had actually caused the tremble across the land. Now, As a consequence, these men said, therefore, our elders and all the inhabitants of our land. Notice this word here is land. Spoke to us saying, take provisions with you for the journey, go meet them and say, we are your servants. Understand this, your servants. These are the conditions of the covenant. Now, therefore, make a covenant with us. In fact, it's called cut a covenant with us. And in order to show evidence that they are from a faraway land, it says, this bread of ours was hot. And now look at it, it's dry and moldy. Look at these wineskins. They were new, and see, they are torn. These garments, our sandals, were old because of the very long journey. So this is the pretense. This is the trickery. If they knew that they were from a nearby land, Joshua and the Israelites will not cut a covenant. And so this is a trickery. Understand this. The same words that's used about the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, and this is the bad news. They did not ask counsel of the Lord. Verse 14. Verse 14. The word they did not ask counsel from the Lord means what? It literally means they did not inquire the mouth of Jehovah. That is literally how the statement works. The word they did not ask counsel of the Lord literally means they didn't seek what God himself will personally say. And this is an error on their part, because at the time of Exodus 34, the condition was, do not make any covenant with the people of the land. But Joshua made peace with them. Understand, the word peace is shalom. And that would be complete with them, and made a covenant with them to live, to keep them alive. And the rulers of the congregation also swore to them. Now, this is a very important word that we normally would miss. The word is shavah, right? Shavah. And in this case, it would be making an oath. Making an oath in the name of Jehovah. And they would say it 7 times, as Jehovah lives, this is what we agree. We will let you live and be at peace with you. That is what God doesn't want them to do, but they are now making it anyways. So, why is this word swear or swore here, the idea of swearing, so important? Because it is making an oath on the name of God. And when they make an oath on the name of God, it must be kept. It must be honored, no matter what. This is how important it is in the eyes of the people, that in the name of Jehovah, when you make this, as Jehovah lives and he will always live, you must do it. And this is the question, because in chapter 10, things happen to the people of Gibeon. And so just bear that in mind until we reach chapter 10. And it happened at the end of 3 days after they had made or cut, right? This word is cut, a berit. After means they have already cut it with them. They heard that they were their neighbors who dwelt near them. Now, the word neighbors in verse 16 really, how should we say? They are, it's not the word neighbor as we normally use neighbor, by the way. It is actually used by the translators. The literal word is that it means that these were the ones who live near them, right? Who dwelt near them, and they were in the inner part, right? The word their neighbors, it means that they were dwelling in the further interiors. Further interiors from Gilgal and from Ai, basically. So the word neighbors is actually given by the translators so that they don't have to explain what it means. And so I would put a bracket here. Neighbors is not wrong, but that's not the word is expressed here. It merely means that they are living not too far away from them, and they were further in the interiors. And so neighbors is really not the real word. Okay. Then the children of Israel journeyed and came to their cities on the third day. All it takes is a few days to get there. And the cities were Gibeon, and notice here, Kaphirah, Beerot, and this last one is Kirat. Kirat is actually city, right? Kirat literally means a city. And then Ya'arim. Ya'arim would mean forests, right? City of forests. And so these were the names of the city that is in a cluster, that is further in from Ai and Bethel. Now, just read verse 18. But the children of Israel did not attack them. And the word attack here is nakah, strike. Strike to kill. They did not do that. Why? Because the rulers of the congregation had sworn, notice, to them by the Lord God of Israel. This is the oath by the Lord God of Israel. The Lord God of Israel literally means Jehovah Elohei Israel. And this is a very honorable oath. And in the eyes of God, if you break this oath, you die. And so either if they break this oath and attack the Gibeonites, they die. And so they must be honored, and God will honor them. And then all the congregation complained against the rulers. And this is an interesting narrative. The word complain in the Hebrew is lun, right? And basically, it really means to grumble. Yeah, to lodge a report, right? Lodge a report against the rulers. And the idea here is this: the people didn't know about the covenant, and the people don't don't need to know the covenant because the covenant is represented by the rulers. And if they made an oath, they made an oath, and everyone must abide by it. And verse 19 says it very clearly that all the rulers said to all the congregation, we have sworn. This is an oath to them by the Lord God of Israel. Now, therefore, we may not touch them. And so verse 19 says, you cannot touch them. The word is not touch, the word is strike. You can't kill them. This is the oath. No approval to do this. And so this we will do to them. What can you do to them? We will let them live. And this is important. We will let them live. We will preserve them, keep them alive. Because of the oath. Because of the oath. Lest wrath be upon us because of the oath which we swore to them. What do you mean by wrath? Now in verse 20, the idea of wrath is kesef, and this would be the anger of God. You see, they are fully aware now that they have made a mistake. They're not supposed to cut a bereaved, but they did. And in the cutting of the bereaved, they made an oath. Now to God, the oath in the name of God is far more important than anything else. And the oath has now taken over the instruction not to cut a covenant. Well, if you think about it, when God says don't cut a covenant and it is done, can you undo a covenant? And that would be not possible. You undo the covenant, you pay the price. So in the covenant is an oath. The oath is by the name of Jehovah. And the oath by the name of Jehovah is so strict and rigid that God expects it to be honored. And if it's not honored and it's broken, God will bring death upon the one who made the oath. And so the ruler said, let them be alive, but let them be wood cutters and water carriers. So in this case, they are making the Gibeonites and all of them there to be wood cutters. They would cut or chop wood. They will carry the wood back for them, right? And then they would be water carriers. What do you mean water carriers? They are the ones who would draw water for them. Now, one of the things that you find is that water carriers, or where you find a well and you draw water, most of them are women. And so now the Gibeonites are the one to do it for all the congregation as the rulers had promised them. Look at this word in verse 21. The word promised them is the word davar. See, the word davar has a multifaceted explanation or usage. So the word say is davar, the issue is davar, the promise is davar, because it is not a word. The word that is given to them as a whole is an oath. And hence the davar is the oath. All right. And then Joshua called for them and he spoke to them, because I would expect that the people lodge a complaint to Joshua. And so Joshua also had to explain. And so Joshua spoke to them. And this is also davar. So that is an issue to resolve. Who is them? These would be the men from Gibeon. All right. Why have you deceived us? The word here, deceived, literally means to mislead. Why did you mislead us? Trick us, right? And this is something which is being used later on in the prophet books like Jeremiah, that Judah was playing tricks on God, pretending that everything is fine, but they were also playing the harlot or serving other gods. And so this is the word, trickery. Why do you trick us? Saying that we are very distant from you, but you are actually dwelling very near us. Now, therefore, you are cursed. With a trickery, there is an expectation of cursing. Now, this word curse is ara, and it means to pronounce a curse, by spitting. Now, understand this, a curse is not like how should you say? A curse is really imprecatory. It's saying it's pronouncing something that's not very nice. And in this case, it is a very intense way of saying that this is a bad thing that is going to come upon you, and they spit on the ground. It is not to kill them, but it is something that is worse than they are today. And hence, the serpent was cursed. And so the Gibeonites were cursed. It says, none of you shall be freed from being slaves. Woodcutters are carriers for the house of my God. And this is for the tabernacle. This is not serving in the tabernacle, but it is serving for the tabernacle. And so, is this a curse? Well, understand this. The Gibeonites could fight. The Gibeonites are well-groomed fighters. They have ability, but they have decided that they would not fight and they would serve instead so that their lives are spared. Is that a curse? Well, they now have a chance to live, but they are no longer living as they were. They are now called cursed, ara, that they will continue to serve as the people who would gather trees, gather wood, chop wood, draw water, all for the purposes of Beit Elohai, Elohai, right? And that would be the house of my God, which is Jehovah. Well, in a way, it is like humiliation, but in a way, it is a privilege because they are also having the ability to serve the only true God. Look at what they now say in verse 24. This is our last segment. They, the Gibeonites, answered Joshua and said, and this would be the response. Although they think, Joshua says this is a curse, he says this because your servants were clearly told that the Lord your God had commanded Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. And this is a very, how should you say, this is an A and a B as well, all right? The Lord and to destroy before you, this is an A and this is a B. The idea here is that the land is definitely going to be belonging to Israel. That your servants, the Gibeonites. They were clear. This means that they had heard the report. They have heard the report clearly told that this report is absolutely clear. That's basically what the phrase means. They have heard a report that they cannot deny. It is unambiguous. It is absolutely clear that Jehovah, your God, had commanded Moses, his servant, to give you all the land. Because they heard that they give the land of Sihon and Og, it is done. And they came and they killed everybody. And they heard and saw what they did in Jericho and Ai. And what were they supposed to do to give you the land? It is to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. Hence, this is an A and a B. This is the reason why they made the covenant. Therefore, watch. We were very much afraid for our lives. The idea here is in verse 24, they were very fearful. This is the word that is usually used for the children of Israel for God. Fear God. And now the Gibeonites are now very afraid for their lives because of you. Because of you, the Israelites. And have done this thing to trick them, to actually cut a covenant. Now understand this, because of you is not that Israelites are so great. Because of you is about the Lord your God. That your Lord your God is different from other gods that they know. And the Lord your God, when he says he will give you the land, he will give you the land. This is a very, very important aspect, that the name of God or the character of God is now reflected in his people by what God has done and by the obedience of the Israelites. And because of that, they decided that they will trick Israel to have peace. And now we are in your hands. Notice the word in your hands is a phrase. In your hands in verse 25 is that they are going to listen to them. That's the covenant. We are going to be your servants. In your hands is another way of saying we are your servants. Do with us as it seems good and right to do with us. And so you have an A and now you have a B. In your hands means do what you want with us, which is good and right. Now, notice what the two words mean. All right. Right is yashar. Yashar means what is upright. Right? Yashar is what is upright. This is not tov. This is the correct thing to do. The second word, sorry. The first word here is tov. Tov means what is agreeable, and upright means what is correct to do to us. And because they know the Lord your God is a good God and Israelites will listen to their God, and so we are okay to be in your hands because what you say is good and right is also good and right in the sight of God. And hence this covenant that is tricked upon them to do is actually to save their lives, and they would not be humiliated like the Babylonians or the Egyptians or the Assyrians later on. And so they know that the Israelites, under their God, Jehovah, their God, will be okay. It's fine. And so if you say this is cursed, let this be the case. It is not as bad as we think. And so he did to them and delivered them out of the hand of the children of Israel, so that they did not kill them, and they kept the oath. And that day Joshua made them woodcutters, water carriers for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord, in the place which he would choose, even to this day. Understand that in the place he would choose eventually would be Shiloh one day, and even to this day when it was written. And so these people, even though they call curse, and none will be freed from being slaves or servants, but they will be servants of the house of God, of Jehovah. And to the Gibeonites, this is not a curse. And so a curse is really not what we think a curse is. It is basically telling them that they are no longer free people to do as you wish, but you can live. And they are happy with that. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 9.